Yeah, so just for the record, this is ONNX working group meeting on September 4th. We have Milan, Yedong, and Saurabh currently present. And there you go. Okay, so I did share, I'm gonna share my screen so we can start kind of talking about things. Where's the share? Share. Okay. You guys see this?
It's starting to.
Yes, I can see.
Yeah. So yeah, this is just our Gitter channel, and so I thought this would be agenda. I guess just kind of local readout for this group. Not everybody was in a workshop. Yedong primarily, Offer and Saurabh were there. So I guess I'll start by saying that I did upload. Somebody else joined. Let's see who that is.
It's me, Offer.
Hey, Offer. Hey.
Hey.
So we just basically started. So I was just about to say that, I did upload the slides that were used in the workshop to our workshops meeting, and so you can find them here. I thought that we should just run a quick, few minutes, maybe Offer and Saurabh actually could give update to the group for the folks that were not there, maybe skinny, of what happened in the workshop regarding our slides and our concerns and discussion topics that we had. I am guessing that maybe Offer or Saurabh, one of you can kind of jump in, but the thing is just that I was thinking maybe if we go to basically maybe challenges, we presented our challenges to the audience, and then there was a breakout session, and there was a discussion on 2 proposals that we put up, and then there was a readout, right? And so anything, maybe 5 minutes just to kind of go over the whole, how the work group session went in the workshop.
Okay, so maybe I can start, and Saurabh, feel free to add your perspective. So we did an overview of Edge, kind of emphasizing that Edge is not just for mobile devices, but Edge is covering a wider scope. And we went through the slides covering what was done so far. We presented the challenges, kind of talked about the fact that we have low attendance, and the other issue of the complexity and of defining the profiles and making sure that we wouldn't have too much. We didn't get responses specifically in the status update meeting because it was very short and brief. So during the session, during the breakout session, I went over again on defining profiles. There was, during the workshop, there was of course higher attendance. I think there were about 20, 25 people in the room, something like that. At least 2 of them were very active. There was a guy that is running the data pipeline working group. I forgot his name, but you can find it. He was asking questions. And there was the other 2 participants. And so we talked about, some of the questions were raised around accuracy. looks like some point of concern that we need to pay more attention, how to define accuracy. So I kind of said this is being open. And then we went through briefly through the topology, and mainly we spent the rest of the time talking about Saurabh's proposal to extend profiles into execution mode. This idea was received nicely by people. I recall some points that Manash from Microsoft raised was about the ability to query. Like, once we established all of this system, it was beyond Saurabh's presentation, but also covering it. Once we establish a system of profiles and a system of compliance or certification, and we extend it to execution mode, the question becomes how a framework actually uses it in the scene, in the wild. Is there some query, or is there some way to set the execution mode other than through the model? And these two things, of course, come up into defining an API, which is right now outside of the scope of the working group. And this is something that we said. So there was a lively discussion. I think, again, we had at least 2 or 3 other people from the participants were actively engaged. But, looking at the attendance today, I don't see that it actually rolls out to have more people on the call, which is unfortunate.
Yes, I was about to say, so we did specifically say that, but the thing is, like, I heard that, that seemed to be a sort of aching point for lots of SIGs and working groups, right? That participation is not just like very, very wide.
Yeah, that's true. And I think even in other working groups like training or even the operator SIG, that the attendance is higher, it appears that the actual work is only being done by 2 or 3 people. So in our case, we have no attendance, which of course reflects the low number of people able to do work and contribute. But even in the working groups that there is higher attendance, still they end up with a small number of contributions from people.
Okay. Well,
so this was basically my summarize my view of the workshop. Saurabh, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think you covered our session pretty well. I think outside our session, as overall, they made some changes in the ONNX governance. They are making a legal entity similar to Linux Foundation and all that, which will help more contributions. I think right now their licensing and all that is a deterrent, and I'm hoping that those changes in their governance model will help more companies to contribute. Right.
Okay, so this is like changing the whole ONNX licensing model, you mean?
Yeah, right now, yeah. So that's what they're making it more open. There'll be some elections, and they have procedures of how the people can self-nominate and campaign to be part of the steering committee, and they are making changes so that even the IP, ONNX IP, is well represented by the governance body.
Okay, so what does it mean? I mean, even now, that's like in terms of the making it more open, in terms of the governance, but in terms of the sort of open source license, is that also considered? Right now it's pretty open. It's MIT, right? But
right. So right now there is not a legal entity for ONNX, and what I understood, right? So now they are making a legal entity which when we are contributing something on Git in the open source community, there's a legal entity we can say that, the agreement has been signed with them. So that open foundation will be able to govern ONNX. So I think the IBM guys are driving that effort in getting that established.
Moving towards the Apache or something, right? Is that what?
Yes, he had a big table. He was discussing pros and cons of all the different options out there.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess. Okay. Thanks, guys, for the brief update. And Yadong, do you have any maybe questions or specific things to follow up on?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we are, back in in a working mode after the workshop, and now we have to decide what to do next, right? And I think at least it is standard crew, and we don't see much uptake from other other participation yet. So we'll just stay tuned and see how that rolls out. But I would say if I go back to agenda, right? So we have these two things that we propose in our workshop, and I think as I get it, like there was not. I mean, we need to decide: are we going to extend our statement of work to cover for the edge profiles as execution mode, right? As a working group, we have to do that. It seems like based on at least feedback or discussion points from the workshop, it was something that, I mean, there was no objections, I would say, right? I mean, I'm not sure if there were like strict, big support for it either, right? I mean, so we have to decide whether we want to do this or not. And, then there's all this aspect of, API, and that is complete, another way of another dimension that we need to consider for the whole statement of work. One thing that I will say about this edge profile as execution mode is that the way it's defined, or rather, the way in the document now I clearly understand what Saurabh meant with the execution compliance discussion we had before the workshop, and maybe that wasn't clear then, but now I understand. So this is like about having this as a contract or execution contract for the model executor, and to kind of obey it. And so you do either through by embedding this into the model itself, ONNX model, or also or actually, I guess, extending or providing some sort of API that devices would support to provide their capabilities, right? What kind of profiles they can run. Now, one thing that I'm gonna say is that to me that is just goes even beyond the edge, right? We're talking about embedding a profile into the model, which is generally applicable, right? It doesn't have to do with the edge anything, right? It could be if you're saying, okay, execute this model with this profile. That means, like, I want you to run with these execution parameters. Well, that could be, that's applicable in the cloud, in the edge, everywhere. It's not just edge. And so from that perspective, I'm just having a question. I like the idea. It is kind of interesting. Whether we want to make it part of the edge working group, that's another discussion. It seems like it is of more general, it is a more general purpose than just edge. That is one concern that I'm thinking of. So I'm just curious I would like to, hear maybe others' views on this. If you agree to extend and add this to the working group, yeah, then we should update the statement of work and make sure that it's covered. Right?
Makes sense.
So, I'm just wondering what you guys think. Should this be part of the Edge working group statement of work? Execution mode, control, or not?
I think I fully agree with you. Technically speaking, yes, this can be applicable to the execution environment on the cloud also. Cloud workloads are also of two kinds. Some of them run AI as ensembles, and they just saturate the whole platform, and they don't care about execution profiles because these are like big data cluster systems which are just running these things in parallel, right? That's one way some of the cloud services are implemented. Some other more scalable cloud services are containerized, and I would say they might have usage of these edge profiles. And but so far we haven't seen much need. Like they don't, because they have another orchestration mechanism through VMs, and through that mechanism they can do resource allocation, and again they don't care about it much because of that very reason. Again, they can control the execution environment using the VM knobs that are available to them. However, in Edge, some of these things are not needed or not available, and that's why the motivation is coming from the Edge side, I would say. But I fully agree with your statement that yes, it's not just restricted to Edge. If somebody wants to apply it on the cloud deployments also, they can. There's nothing stopping them.
Yeah, and that is one thing that, like, if we define edge profiles, I guess it is okay to say we recommend. We could say we recommend ONNX Group that these edge profiles be considered as execution contracts as well.
Right.
And then recommend this to do we need to do anything specific about it though? If we define these edge profiles from the original perspective we started with, which is like about certification and compliance, right? Perspective for the vendors to say I'm compliant with this profile. Then the using the same profile for the purposes of controlling execution. Then to me, I'm not sure. That could be a recommendation that we could make to the ONNX body and say, I'm guessing infra sig, or I think infra sig, yeah. And so we can say, listen, we think this profile approach, you should consider extending your ONNX spec, because extending it requires adding changes to the model spec, right?
Right.
And other things that people can put in place to say, oh, okay, so we agree, and then they could say they could adopt it or not. I'm not sure if we need to kind of specifically deal with it in this working group, other than recommending that this is an interesting option to consider for you for ONNX body. Because now if you start getting to the API definition and all this stuff, this is all recommendation. To me, those are recommendations we make to ONNX infra group, say, okay, listen, consider these two things. And do we need to do? I wouldn't necessarily think that we need to get that this working group needs to get into the defining the ONNX or proposing changes to the ONNX format, or proposing changes to introduce new API. To me, that's beyond the scope of this working group. At least that's my view. But we can recommend, listen, consider doing these things. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, and one of the reasons is also because, yeah, it has just global implications. It's not just Edge. It is just general concept that is applicable everywhere. Because even in the document here that I'm reading, and I read this morning through, that you put together, Sarah, yeah, I mean, and it talks about, yeah, I mean, executor needs to allocate the proper memory or schedule the execution workload, allocate proper resources. Well, that's very much also cloud applicable, right? You can say, yeah, run this on the cloud, but execute with this profile because I don't need it any faster, right? And that is going to help cloud because they don't use many resources, and and they could properly balance the resource loading and all that stuff. And so it's very much a good idea. I agree that it could be proposed. I'm just not 100% convinced that this working group needs to kind of deal with it.
Sure, that makes sense.
I think that for now, the first challenge that we have is to see that we manage to define profiles in a way that we're satisfied with, in a way that is consistent and represents what we want it to represent, and we are able to capture the correct set of attributes and restrictions as we set out to do. And using the profile as an execution mode is kind of depending on being able to correctly describe profiles in a way that is sufficient. So to me, it looks like the first task that we should focus on is on the profiles, and once we have them set, then we can definitely go and say, we're satisfied with that, and we can use them also as execution mode, and here's how to do that.
Right.
So one thing to add here is, and I think I touched there, it was also discussed in the comments section there too. Like the way we are defining right now as static profiles, like fixed profiles, I think the applicability of such concept would remain restricted to fixed function devices then. Like if we want to extend the concept of Edge to devices which can do more than a fixed thing, then we need to also get into this space of execution modes. Otherwise, we will only be able to tackle like fixed devices like vision or audio or speech or something of that sort.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm just like I guess if we consider this like profile topology map, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have we say we go this path, and we define 2D profiles, and it's quite possible that the single device, I guess you call it static, but I mean single device could support multiple of the profiles, right? We agree about that, right? I mean, it could be that even smart speaker is a composite device. Smart speaker can support 2D basic profile and audio basic profile, for example, right? I mean, that even the smart speaker is a composite device. Even PC, obviously, it's very much composite device, right? And so from that perspective, I don't see. I guess when you say we only can focus on the static profiles, I'm not sure that I understand what you mean. To me, any device is pretty much could be composite device combined from one or more profiles, right? Any device.
Let me elaborate a little bit more on that. So in case of a PC kind of environment, you have hundreds of processes that are running simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And the scenario requires a certain quality of service. And right now, there is not a way to express that. There is not a way to express that this model requires this much memory, this much power, this much, all these different attributes that we have already defined. Like this model requires it to go to the network also, right? Like for the fifth attribute that we talked about. So some of these things are not just static elements, they are sort of dynamic in the sense that a PC can probably support, n number of profiles and not just like a bigger number than just 4 or 5 things that we end up defining or
Right.
hard coding some fixed attributes that these are the things that would define as an audio profile or a 2D profile. In case of a PC environment, like, depending on the model to model, it's very closely associated with the model file.
Yeah, I
think
get that.
I think maybe because we talked about it a little bit on the working group, during the workshop. Let me kind of add a little bit to try to better understand. What you're saying, Sauravi, the profiles that we say define fixed values for the attributes. So we have an attribute set, and for each one of these attributes, we provide a value, and then the fixed set of attribute values is something that we call a profile. And basically what you're saying, when we come to execute on devices, you don't have to stick to that fixed set of values of attributes by some of the profiles. But I agree with that, but in the sense that definitely goes beyond what we described as profiles in the statement of work of the working group. Because getting back to the goal was by compliance, creating a certification. And the basic of this certification process was around defining this, had a fixed and defined values for each one of them. And
we are losing offer. You're dropping a little bit.
Sorry, let me try and actually, in 5 minutes I'm connect back for my room.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now.
I'm just certify a range. It's a
well, doesn't work. Okay, offer. Let's wait until you get back into office or dial in. You're dropping again, so we missed last 20 seconds or something. So just we'll wait for offer to come in. But bottom line, I mean, it seems like to me that if we are to use this profiles attributes to actually change them dynamically afterwards for the quality of service purposes. Say we have the profile that is basic 2D and it defines maximum input image size and maximum inference and all that stuff. And that is like to say that that profile, when vendor says I'm compliant with this profile, meaning I can support this, right? But what we are now saying is that at the runtime, you could even say oh, this guy can support this profile, but let me dynamically change some of these attributes and say instead of running 30 frames per second, run 20 frames per second. Because that is within the boundaries of the profile, but we are now talking maybe about dynamically changing this, these attributes at the execution time to control execution, right?
So so the model producer, right, when he's training the model or he's creating the model, he's compliant to the profile, but then he's also specifying that within that range, these are hints on how I want this model to be run.
Yeah. So I would argue that I think it's a great suggestion. I don't think necessarily that this working group should define parameters and how this control works for the execution for the reasons I already discussed. It seems like if we focus on the profile boundaries in terms of defining the boundaries of the profile, then I think this recommendation to the either this execution control of the model becomes a you know, either proposal to the infrasig, or it becomes new working group, because it seems like it has bigger implications, not just Edge. To me,
Makes sense.
I mean, that's my take. But you know, maybe we don't go right away into this changing the really scope of work for the Edge working group, but rather continue on a path that we envisioned. But then clearly we can as we define these profiles, we can always, you know, maybe cross-check this thinking of execution control and see how this kind of aligns, and if profile indeed is the way we are defining the profile with the attributes we identified, is something that is sufficient to control execution as well. In a general sense, the quality of service when you want to execute the model, controls may require more knobs, right? Not just the attributes that we have in our profile currently. And I don't know, and that's why I think even that execution control and the quality of service control is perhaps it's a separate topic to consider, you know, either through another working group or through as a recommendation to the infra body, and then we go from there. But right now, I would think that we should focus on defining the profiles we envision at the beginning, and go from there.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing was that so I guess there was this you know, document that you put together as a proposal in context of execution compliance, that Offer did some comments on and did some suggestions to clarify, to disambiguate this compliance versus execution, because that is what is creating a bit of a maybe confusion. But if you all agree, I mean, I guess we should not then necessarily continue about discussing, you know, using or updating the extending edge profile definition to be used for the as an execution mode control for now, right? So I don't know. I mean, it's up to Saurabh. We could table this document for now, and then come back to it. You are free to update the document per comments, actually, if you want. But at least we captured thinking here, and so that's is good enough for content, right? Originally when we started talking about this, and that's why where compliance got confusing, is that I thought we were talking about ONNX compliance workflow, which is Edge profile compliance workflow, which is a part of our scope, which is about to say these are the profile parameters. Then we are defining the workflow that somebody needs to follow to certify that they're compliant with this profile. Meaning, the part of that workflow is to define, using the golden test vectors and pushing it to the some execution engine, getting results back, comparing with your own results, and so on, right? This is where that compliance we talked about is about, right? And so we need to definitely make that part of the profile. And actually, that would be great if you could actually elaborate and create a separate document for that type of compliance, right? It's about Edge profile certification. It's about vendors certifying their devices to be compliant with a defined Edge profile. And so what is that workflow, right? And it's actually kind of similar in a context to this document, because there are certain parameters, but obviously once we get into definition and scope of this, it becomes clear that we are talking about the execution mode, and so that is different. But the parameters, attributes, and all that stuff, they have similar meaning or same meaning in both cases. So is that something that maybe Saurabh, you can take a spin on to really focus on the Edge profile compliance, but from the certification point of view, workflow. What I described as a compliance workflow, Edge profile compliance workflow, which is about our original intent. That's something that you could pick up on.
Yeah, I think I need to better understand, things a little bit on where we're going with the static profiles. Again, I'm sorry, I'm using the term static profile here because to me, it's still very much centered around IoT devices, not the multifunction devices, which have a lot more to offer, right?
Well, I guess, okay, yes, it's a static set of parameters. It's actually static in a way that we have attributes and we say we are going to probably define ranges. For example, accuracy has to be at a certain level, and speed, for example, for the has to be. Let me see that document here. So for example, 2D basic profile. Yes, it will have a static set of attributes and say, okay, for example, speed is 30 frames per second, for example, or 50. And that's static. But it could be up to 30 frames per second. It could be at least 30 frames per second, right? Or could be more, right? Or depends how we define. So it will have a range of values potentially that we specify as a part of a profile. Now, anything, if you are meeting that within that with these bounds, then somebody who is saying and validating their device that can do certain profiles, they will say, well, yes, I'm compliant, I'm certified that I can do this profile.
let me ask you this thing differently then, right? So what would be the implication of the edge profiles on a PC device, once we create the compliance and certification methodology for it?
So I would imagine you would say, I am compliant. Say if you say we define these 6 profiles here, I'm sharing on screen, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And you say PC will be compliant with all 6 profiles. Meaning, like, I can do all these profiles, right? So now this is to say I am capable of doing this, right? Now, execution control and quality of service control, it's now a different topic. How do you dynamically say and control, I want to run this model, but bounded to 20 frames per second, for example. I mean, that is completely, within the bounds of the supported profiles, but there has to be a mechanism that somebody established in ONNX world to enable that control, right? Of dynamic fitting into the desired execution parameters, right?
I understand. I think maybe we need to discuss more about the definition of edge then. PC will be able to support all the ops that the ONNX infra team is coming up with. Right?
Yes.
So there are no limitations from the PC perspective. So
not necessarily. Okay. Let's say that I define a profile that says that now you need to process 12 different images at 4K at 100 frames per second.
Okay.
Let's say I have this profile.
Okay.
Not every PC can now hold. This is an automotive profile. Okay. Not every PC can process input from 12 cameras at 100 frames per second, 4K resolution. So even a PC has limitations.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so it's only a question of how high we define some profiling to be. Maybe we can define it in some high level that even some of the PCs would not be able to meet these profiles. So I somewhat disagree that PC can support any of the defined profiles. It's a question of how high we define the profiles, and this is where.
Well, I mean, when I use the term PC, I said in general the computing device, right?
Right.
Like PCs in general are extendable, and in general, a computing device, you could bring in other things too, right? So what I meant by.
But wait, PC, okay. There is no such thing as a PC. There is a specific Lenovo modem, or let's say HP Pavilion 590 something. This is a termination of a device, not a general class of things that covers hundreds and thousands of modems underneath. Right?
I mean, you could argue that yes, you could upgrade the PC and add some very powerful GPU card, right? And suddenly that PC is becoming compliant with certain profile because it can do it. Yes, true, but again, it is about vendors certifying particular devices.
So, yeah. Let me elaborate on what I meant by that here. What I meant is that right now we are not associating profiles to model files. We are associating it to a platform. For a platform which is scalable, as what I am talking about, a scalable platform will have less benefit of these profiles. A scalable platform will not be able to, like if you create a 2D profile, basic, intermediate, and advanced, for a scalable platform, it doesn't mean a whole lot. Yes, there is some value, but it's not a huge, exciting thing. A scalable platform can benefit a little bit more if we would say that, these are things, the same 5 things that we have talked about, but they are actually embedded in the model file. Then a scalable platform can read it and execute it accordingly. It can decide, oh, I need to use that accelerator that is in my system, or decide not to use it. Like the example that you gave about automotive, it could very well be that in that example, it can choose to run it accordingly or not. So the only aspect that I think I'm trying to add here is that if we're talking about an edge device, there is a scalable edge device also. And to me, the scope of, or the definition of edge that we defined earlier, if it is going to cover a scalable edge device also, then that element is also important. Otherwise, we'll be restricted to just IoT edge devices, and at least that's how I see things. But I guess we need to discuss a little bit more further down. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I get it. But one thing that I'm kind of wondering, when you say scalable device, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scalable.
I'll give you an example, right? Like
certain device has certain characteristics, compute characteristics that somebody defined to begin with. Even PC, right? So when you say scalable, do you think about scalability in terms of somebody upgrading or changing compute characteristics of the device? Or scalable in terms of capabilities of that device in terms of the execution? Like,
let me give you an example, right? Let's say when Lenovo XYZ, that platform came up, right?
mm-hmm.
And we certified that, oh, it can only comply to the audio basic device profile only, right? We certified it can only comply to the audio basic profile. Now, most of the devices that are in the market right now, they have a Thunderbolt port. It's a PCIe extension, basically, right? They have USB ports. So device which is scalable can now suddenly be able to support profiles which are more advanced. Now, when we advertise the platform to begin with, we said it's only compliant to a basic profile. Now, I'm not saying that the profile cannot be updated. It can be updated. However, the value of such static profiles is relatively less for a scalable device. I understand it's very much important for a fixed function IoT device, but it's going to be less interesting for a scalable device like any general purpose computing device.
So then scalability means like extending compute capabilities of the device by means of plugging in USB device or
this is just one example. There are other examples too, right? We have multiple cores, so you can switch off some of the cores, some are on. So the capabilities are always changing. And to save the power, we might just start using a smaller core, right? So they could,
I'm guessing the way I guess see it. I get what you're saying, but the thing is, like, somebody would say, when somebody would say I'm compliant or certified for these profiles, they have to describe device characteristics. They have to say, on this PC, running in a nominal mode, not in turbo mode, right? Running in, with this clock frequency, whatever. They will need to describe device characteristics. That includes PC.
Right.
And they will have to say, within these parameters of the device, I'm compliant with these profiles. Now, if you change these characteristics of the device, then becomes, okay, now I'm compliant with these extra 3 profiles.
So the characteristics are always dynamic in a PC environment, at least the ones that I work at Intel at. So all these things, these characteristics that you're saying, they are constantly being managed by the system. Frequency, memory, a lot of these things are coming and going. And unlike a fixed function device where you have these things are fixed, in a PC environment, these things are always changing. You load an app, your memory has gone down now. So you might have been compliant to advanced profile to begin with, not anymore. You're running out of battery suddenly, right? So the system kicked in power saving mode, and next, your compute is gone down.
I totally agree. But what I'm trying to say is, when you declare your compliance, when somebody declares compliance to a certain profile, they have to explain and describe their test environment. That means fully powered. So just going to some of your examples, they'll have to cover, okay, fully powered, fully charged battery, just like fresh boot from the start. I mean, you'll have to describe your test environment to say, when I run in this test environment, I can certify that I am compliant. This is very much the same as with benchmarks. You cannot, benchmarks dictate that you specify your configuration, right? Otherwise benchmarks are moot, right? If you just say, I can run this speed, but without saying how you can run that, then it's gonna be, kind of data point without, much value. Bottom line, everybody will have to describe how, under what circumstances, certain hardware configuration is compliant with a certain profile. Now, how much of that value is to the end user, for example, in the PC space, and because it's like very dynamic and changing. Good question. I don't know. To me, it's a sort of ballpark estimate. If you run it in this configuration, I can guarantee you can achieve these profiles, right? And that's it. If you change these execution environment, your mileage will vary, right? Because it hasn't been within parameters of the test environment that I used to certify this. And that is the way I see it, at least.
Yeah, no, I think I'm following what you're saying, but I just feel that it will be a burden for a scalable compute device to be compliant to some static profiles. It will be a burden and limiting in some ways. And for the reasons that I just explained, that and maybe we can put a little bit more thought, like how this thing needs to evolve. Maybe we can come up with some middle ground here of how we can while still keeping a scalable compute device within the edge definition, how can we still make it relevant, these edge profiles to be relevant for that, such a device also?
Yeah, I guess, the way in my mind, it's clear. How would somebody clarify compliance? As I said, you need to describe the platform that is being certified for, right? And so, to me, that seems reasonable. I get the challenges that PC may face, but I also feel that within certain predefined set of platform hardware configuration parameters that somebody is using, it's still valid. You can say within within these hardware spec parameters and execution environment, I can say I'm compliant. And that's all it means, right? I mean, it means like, if you change these parameters in any significant way, well, yeah, you're suddenly may not be compliant with this profile, or you may be compliant with the higher profile. It is the way I think it could be managed. Yeah, that could lead to many variations for the scalable, highly scalable device like PC, in terms of, okay, how many hardware configurations and execution modes I need to test and certify. I guess that's up to the vendor then to decide how many of these different hardware setups I would like to certify for. So that's extra kind of burden, but it's not unimaginable to be done, and so I'm just wondering if that is gonna be like really a blocker or showstopper for further discussion. Maybe if we go down the path of defining these profiles, we start thinking through it again, and try to kind of maybe as we kind of review, some of these things will potentially present itself how it could be managed, and so we can adjust basically based on that. But we should start going down the path of defining the profile, right? And maybe you call it static profile, but yeah, it is, yes, static profile. It provides certain parameters that people need to comply with, and that's all it is. Okay, so listen, we are out of time. I actually need to run to another meeting. I guess some action items for next meeting. Perhaps I could take the stab of defining one of these profiles, like 2D basic, maybe even all three of them. I had proposal in this direction already we discussed, so maybe I could more extend that for next time, and so we kind of we can consider reviewing that next time, and then then use that maybe as a potential template for others, right? And then some other folks can take on others, and then we can establish we have to establish set of profiles we are originally gonna be saying we are gonna define. Right now we have these 6. I don't know if we need to go further than that right now. I would like that we define something that is kind of tangible, and then the addition of more is something that could come afterwards, and even after working group finishes, in a sense, like, okay, here's the set of things that we defined, and then there is a part to extend this, right, if need be. Does that make sense for next time, that we kind of go through one of these profiles more in depth, and then discuss and review?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, guys. So I'll schedule a meeting as regular stuff, like we have it every 2 weeks, and then I'll post on Gitter and all that.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.